Chapter 3 Subject Shiphead Eulina Species. Uricari Description. Reptilian humanoid, no tail. 5, 3 inches 1.6 mavg height, 135 pounds 61 kilograms avg weight, 105-year life expectancy. Ship, RSV Loalana. Fights with honor. Location, Sol, 2 Omni-Union destroyers just entered the system from warp, Kryn said with obvious panic in her voice. A lot of thoughts ran through my mind at once. Why were they here? They obviously pursued us, but how and why? What do we have that they want? The only reason I could think of was that they had followed us to confirm the kill. Will the aliens be able to fight them off? I remembered the gigantic ship that first greeted us. Yes, they'll absolutely be able to destroy the OU ships. The only question was whether they would be able to do so before the ships got us. I trepidatiously watched the holographic display. The destroyers were bearing down on the alien vessel at full speed. Alarms pinged as the OU ships fired their weapons. Weapons fired! OU shields have spooled up! They're advancing! Kryn continued her play-by-play. The alien ship had already maneuvered to face them. I watched the missiles travel from the OU to the aliens and bit my tongue nervously. The OU ships began to turn to port and starboard for a broadside, acting in a kind of unison that only they can manage. They were going to be able to fire on all 3 of our vessels at once, and those broadsides would tear through us like a tissue. Before they got a chance to complete the maneuver, the alien vessel disappeared. It was gone for less than a second before it reappeared between the OU ships and the missiles they had fired. The aliens fired weapons, but the display didn't know what to make of them. It was over in an instant, both OU destroyers crippled in a single shot from a ship that was smaller than they were. I watched in awe as they both exploded from reactor meltdowns. The word shocked doesn't even begin to describe my feelings. I just witnessed decades-old war doctrines crumble to dust. Not only were the aliens' weapons advanced enough to punch through the shields and armor of the OU ships, but they had been able to secure kill shots without knowing anything about the enemy. I almost felt relieved until I remembered that these aliens had never fought the OU before. They didn't know the SOP standard operating procedure and how dangerous they were even after being crippled. I turned to the lieutenant. "You need to tell your ship to avoid comms contact and stay away from their debris field. Now!" I said, panic seeping into my voice. Lieutenant Babanin looked confused, but nodded and donned his helmet. "Acknowledged. Doing so." As Babanin warned his ship, I turned back in time to watch the alien vessel dispatch the missiles with what seemed like point defense lasers. I made eye contact with Kryn and Luna, who were both noticeably paler. Kryn spoke first. An in-system precision FTL jump followed by immediate weapons fire. "And they didn't lose shields even for a second," Luna said with a tremble in his voice. "That's a pretty standard maneuver around these parts," Corporal Simmons said from beside me. I couldn't help but jump a little. He had somehow moved from across the room without me noticing. Something that big shouldn't be able to move like that. It's unnatural. "How do you compensate for the solar radiation's effect on the FTL field?" Kryn asked. I don't know. I'm just a grunt. I don't get paid to think," Simmons said with a laugh. "You sure don't, Simmons," Babanin interjected. "Shiphead Eulina, quick question. What is it? What happens if the USSS Valor already made comms contact with the enemy vessels?" I didn't even have time to react with horror before the target lock alarm began pinging. I turned back to the display to find the alien vessel pointing directly at us. "Then we die," I said. The only sound on the bridge was the droning target lock alarm as we all made peace with what would surely be our quick demise. I almost cried. We had come so close, and now I was about to die along with all my crew. At least their weapons would ensure we didn't suffer. Much. We all stood together, not saying a single word as we awaited certain death. After about a minute, Lance Corporal Johnson cocked his head to the side and said, "They should have fired by now." Then the alarm cut off. It took a few seconds to realize that we might not die after all, and I released the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This was too much. I collapsed in my seat and held my head in my hands. When I looked back up, Lieutenant Babanin appeared to be having a silent conversation with someone. Then he turned to look directly at me. "So, the, Omni-Union, their AI?" he asked hesitantly. "Yes," I said. "Okay, right, hacking. That explains no comms contact, but why avoid the debris field?" I stood back up. The bastards booby-trapped the hell out of their ships to prevent reverse engineering their technology. Nuclear seeker mines, antimatter mines, hull-ripper drones, and even EMP devices are all released once the ships are crippled or destroyed. Roger that, I'll radio it in. Let's get you all to safety. Things were less stressful from there. I oversaw the evacuation of the injured and dead, then the non-essential personnel. Finally, it was time for me to evacuate with the 2 remaining members of my bridge crew. I sent Kreen and Luna on ahead as I took a moment to say goodbye to my ship. The aliens had said that they'd repair it, but you never know. This might be the last time I see it. It's not right for a shiphead to leave their ship without a goodbye. After my moment of emotional indulgence was over, I checked my respirator and briefly considered grabbing my sidearm from my chair. I thought better of it, though. I doubted that I would have any need of it, and even if I did, it wouldn't do anything against the aliens' armor anyway. I turned to find that Lieutenant Babanine had stayed behind with me. "Let's go," I said. He nodded and led me to the umbilical. It was less structurally sound than I had imagined. It looked like a very long plastic tube with a rope down it. I was confused by this until Lieutenant Babanine stepped inside the tube and began to float. Right. No artificial gravity in a plastic tube in the middle of space. Makes sense. I followed the lieutenant's lead and used the rope to pull myself down the tube. I hate the feeling of weightlessness. Joints popping as they float apart slightly, the tumbling of your stomach. Being unsure of which way was up is a horrible experience, in my opinion. The fact that I was upside down by the time I got to the end of the tube further cemented my disdain. I righted myself and climbed aboard the shuttle. Everyone else had been assigned a seat. I checked on the wounded before finding my own seat. Kron and the others were hanging in there. I let Kreen know that her brother was still alive as we departed for the alien frigate. Johnson and Simmons had removed their helmets and were sitting opposite myself and Kreen. Johnson was a darker shade of beige than Lieutenant Babanine, but had the same eye color. His hair was dark brown and he had scars along his jaw. They looked like claw marks. Simmons had dark brown skin and black hair. His eyes were yellow. They both had the same close-shaved haircut. "So what are your species called?" Kryn asked. Johnson grinned and said, "Well, I'm human, but Simmons here is a shitbag." "Fuck you," Simmons said with a laugh. "We're both human. The Valor is a human ship, and we were chosen as your rescuers and point of first contact because Sol is our home system." "So you have other aliens on board the bigger ship?" Kryn asked with widened eyes. "Please forgive her for the questions. She's naturally curious," I said with a hint of exhaustion. "It's no problem," Simmons said, "but yeah, we do. You've got the Alumari, which are bug people. Then you've got the Kanuknus, which are bird people. And you've got the Gaunts, which are, like, bear, centaurs, but with paws instead of hooves." "What's a centaur?" Johnson laughed and added, "A centaur is a mythical beast that is half human and half horse. You probably don't know what a horse is either, but that's okay. Gaunts have 4 legs and 2 arms. The legs have paws instead of feet, but the arms have hands kind of like our own. You'll probably end up meeting 1 or 2 once we get back to the USS Thanatos. Our engineering staff is mostly Gaunt." "Got it. So let me ask you something. Why are your weapons so advanced? How were you able to kill those 2 ships with 1 salvo? How did you counteract the AI's hacking? It isn't just your ship's weapons either, is it? Those suits you're wearing, I noticed the shimmer." Kryn was nearly salivating as she asked this. Johnson and Simmons looked at each other. They seemed to decide that Simmons should answer. "Well, we don't really know how advanced our weapons are compared to yours. And I'm not really sure how much I'm allowed to tell you about our tech. As far as how we advanced the way we did, well, I'm sure the brass would rather give you a spit-polished version of our history." I found myself curious, though. "What's the shimmer you're talking about, Kryn?" I think they have portable energy shields on those suits," she said as she looked at the humans and back to me. Simmons smiled with all his teeth and tapped his nose. "Got it in one. You're pretty clever, lizard lady." I knew it wasn't meant to be offensive, but Kryn couldn't help but click her mouth in distaste. "Lizards are a type of reptile, as are we, but we are not lizards. We don't even have tails." Johnson picked up on the offense and elbowed Simmons. "Aw, shit, my bad. SR has been working with me on that." "Won't happen again, ma'am," the corporal apologized. "What's SR?" Kryn asked, having already forgotten the offense. Sapient relations. Their job is to make sure that we get along with the other species, Simmons answered sheepishly. Yeah, Simmons is their biggest job. He's lucky he hasn't been busted down for it yet, Johnson said with a smirk. Give him time, though. He'll be a private again soon. Fuck you with a stick, Johnson. That's enough, you two, Lieutenant Babinin interrupted. We're initiating docking procedures. Make sure everyone's secure. He glanced back at me from the cockpit. Shiphead, you're going to be debriefed by the captain once we're aboard. We will need to know everything you know about the Omni Union. Understood, I said, swallowing nervously. Even though they were friendly enough, these humans were damned intimidating. Chapter 4. Subject, Captain Wong. Species, human description, mammalian humanoid, no tail. 6, 2 inches, 1.87 m, AVG height, 185 pounds, 84 kilograms, AVG weight, 170-year life expectancy. Ship, USS Valor location, Sol. It had been a close call. After we had dispatched the enemy combatants, we received a hail we assumed was survivors offering surrender. Instead, we got a bunch of garbled static and lost control of most of our systems. Thankfully, we had Tim. The virus is officially scrubbed clean, and there are no further signs of infection, sir. I took the liberty of checking Lieutenant Babanin's suit to make certain he wasn't infected as well, Tim informed me over the comm. Thank you, Tim. That will be all, I replied. Well, not quite, sir. Admiral Heckett and Captain Reynolds want a debrief of the aliens ASAP. I nearly rolled my eyes. Can't get a moment of peace these days. Potential AI is a pretty big red flag when it comes to combatants, so their rush is understandable. We all had a pretty close brush with death, and the poor aliens must be swimming in fear chemicals right now, though. Still, better to get it over with and let them relax than to drag it out any longer. We also had to get med data for them, and that was likely to be unpleasant, especially with Doc Zickler. Did they provide a list of must-asks? I asked. Of course, it's on your tablet. Shall I send for shiphead Yulina? Yes, clear a conference room and set up an audio call with Admiral Heckett and Captain Reynolds. Since they're so damned curious, they can take part themselves, I said, with no lack of venom in my words. All righty, Tim said with an enthusiasm he knew was annoying. I grabbed my tablet and headed to the conference room. I sat in my favorite chair and began looking over the battle data. The Omni Union was pathetic. Their shields were similar to what we use for our infantry, and their missiles were hardly space-worthy. Not much more advanced than their foes. If it weren't for the synchronous movements and confirmation from the reptile captain, I would doubt they were AI at all. A real AI was a much, much more dangerous foe. There was a knock at the door, and Lieutenant Babinin entered with shiphead Yulina in tow. Captain Wong, sir, this is shiphead Yulina of the RSV Loalana. Shiphead Yulina, this is Captain Wong of the USSS Valor. Please have a seat, Babinin said as he gestured to one of the many chairs in the room. Thank you for your assistance, Captain Wong, Yulina said as they sat down. I put on my best captain face and said, I only wish we could have done more, shiphead. My apologies for conducting this debrief so soon after what must have been a traumatic incident, but we have certain policies in place that demand haste when it comes to hostile AI. After fighting the OU for so many years, I completely understand. I smiled and continued. Good. This is a formal debrief under United Systems military law. You currently have the rights afforded to you as a first-contact refugee. You may request accommodations if you find the debriefing conditions unsuitable to your needs. You may request medical attention as well as food and water. You may refuse to answer any question that pertains to information that your governing entity considers classified. Any violent actions on your part will result in a revocation of these rights and will be met with extreme force. Yulina swallowed nervously, but I continued. Refusal to participate in this debrief will result in your classification changing to potential combatant, and you will be detained and confined to quarters, as will any uninjured members of your crew. I am required to inform you that this debrief is being recorded as well as monitored, live by Admiral Heckett and Captain Reynolds. They will not be speaking. I added a bit of emphasis on my last sentence to show my contempt for their micromanagement. The poor reptile looked like his head was swimming. Do you understand these disclosures as they've been read to you? I finished. Yes, Yulina said slowly. Yes, I think I do. Excellent. First question, what is your rank, governing entity, species, and sex, please? The shiphead blinked and said, I am a shiphead, which is a commander of a ship in the Republic fleet. The Republic is my governing entity, and I am a male Urakari. Thank you, I said. Now for the tough questions. What were you doing before you were attacked? Ulina seemed unsure whether he should answer. We were sent to scout out warp fluctuations that seemed unnatural and were ambushed by the Omni Union immediately upon our arrival. Our shields hadn't had a chance to re-engage, so we performed a blind warp jump to escape. Then we wound up here. Thank you, I said. That answered the next question as well. Moving on, who are the Omni Union and what is your relation to them? The Omni Union are a conglomeration of artificial intelligences that are seeking expansion. We aren't sure where they originate from, but they began assaulting Republic forces 30 years ago. We have been in open war with them ever since. A pop-up appeared on my tablet from Admiral Heckett, demanding a follow-up question. One which I was going to ask anyway. How many AI do you estimate there are? I asked. We don't know for certain, Ulina looked at the floor, but our experts believe there are at least 100 trillion. Despite myself, I was stunned into silence for a few moments. I'm sorry, I may have misheard. Did you say 100 trillion? I clarified. Yes, impossible, just flat out impossible. Their experts were wrong. There's no way that they could have survived being assaulted by 100 trillion AI. That kind of computing power would lead to an unstoppable singularity. Judging by how easily their forces were dispatched and how close the OU's tech was to the Republic's, these supposed AI were imitative rather than inventive. What the hell is going on here? A message pinged in from Captain Reynolds. Probably not AI. Might be a Gestalt C6. Ask Tim? It wasn't long before a reply from Admiral Heckett came in. Yes. I thought for a moment how to breach this subject and finally said, Ulina, I think there's been a miscommunication. Your definition of artificial intelligence and ours seems to differ somewhat. I'd like to introduce you to an AI and ask their opinion on the matter. Ulina's eyes widened with a shock that I knew would come. AI is taboo in a lot of cultures for good reasons. Eventually, though, Ulina nodded his consent. Tim? I asked, seemingly to empty air. Yes, sir, that empty air responded. You seem to be a necessary presence in this debrief. Catch yourself up and then introduce yourself to our guest. Understood. Working. Caught up. Hello, shiphead Ulina of the Republic space vessel Loalana, Tim said with far too much cheer. I am the artificial intelligence known as Tim. It's short for Timothy, but I prefer to pretend that it's an acronym for Totally Impressive Machine. Ulina now looked as if he had seen a ghost. He managed to stutter, Hello, Tim, pleasure to meet you. Tim, what's your take? I asked. I don't have one yet. I have some questions that need answering first, if you two don't mind. Go ahead, I replied tersely. Shiphead Ulina, to your knowledge, have you ever been able to communicate with the OU? Tim asked. Ulina thought for a moment and said, Kind of. When they attack a system, they broadcast who they are and state their intentions, but they don't respond to any communications we send. Okay. And do you know why your experts believe there are around 100 trillion of them? Something to do with leftover code found in what debris we were able to obtain from our ships that were taken over? Tim paused for a moment and then said, Yeah, I don't think the OU are AI as we define it. I think they're rogue Zixts. The only problem with that theory is that we don't know what could be directing the VI, I said. Ulina looked confused before asking, What's VI? How's it differ from an AI? Tim laughed and said, A VI is a virtual intelligence. It imitates rather than innovates. A VI would watch a sapient solve 2 plus 2 with 4 and would be able to answer 2 plus 2 with 4. An AI would be able to determine that if 2 plus 2 equals 4, then given any two polyhedra of equal volume, it is not always possible to cut. Yeah, we get it. You're smart and stuff. Move on, please, I interjected before Tim could finish disproving Hilbert's third problem. Right, Tim continued. When we were hacked, it was by virtual intelligences, not artificial intelligences. About 400,000 of them. I stared at Ulina for a moment before saying, We only answered the hail of one of the ships. If these experts believe there are 100 trillion of them based off of 400,000 VIs, then that means they estimate that the OU has 250 million ships. Tim cut me off. I glared at the speaker that Tim was talking out of. It may seem futile to anyone watching, but Tim knew what I meant, and that was all that mattered. 250 million ships was a staggering number, though. Yulina looked at me and said, "Yes, at least." "How can you be sure of that?" I asked. "Our scout ships. We periodically check in on the systems they've expanded into that we know of. 250 million was our latest ship count. How have you not been overrun? How many ships does the Republic have?" "I can't tell you exactly how many, but I can say that we have a near equivalent number." Ulina looked back toward the ground. "We're not winning the war, though." "Don't be so downtrodden, shiphead. It's difficult to win a war against an enemy that can mimic your every maneuver in perfect detail," Tim said in an empathetic voice. Tim's attempt at cheering up Yulina didn't appear to have worked. I checked the tablet to see that Admiral Heckett and Captain Reynolds were talking back and forth. 250 million might be a problem. "Outnumbered 5-1, it's almost a fair fight." "No, Reynolds, that's orbital kamikaze numbers, and they likely already know where Saul is." "Then should we bring the fight to them?" "I don't know." "Well, that concludes the debriefing. You look a bit down. Follow me to the bridge. I think I know something that will cheer you up," I said to Yulina as I rose from my seat. The shiphead followed me to the bridge where he stopped, wide-eyed. I looked around and realized that the tech he was seeing was probably pretty impressive by his standards. He hadn't seen anything yet, though. I gestured for him to approach a view screen highlighting the debris field left by the OU ships. "We can't just leave this here, and we also don't want to risk losing resources trying to clean it up," I said while allowing a grin to appear. "What will you do?" Yulina asked. "I think an A2 warhead will do the trick quite nicely, don't you, Tim?" "And that's why I like humans," Tim responded, "always finding ingenious uses for weapons of mass destruction. Prepping the red matter warhead now?" "Red matter? What's that?" Ulina asked. "One of the deadlier weapons in our arsenal. We aren't permitted to use it in standard warfare, but I already got clearance to use it to clean up this mess. Just watch." "Missile ready," Tim said. "Fire." We both watched the view screen as the A2's symbol approached the debris field. Once it was within range, it detonated, and all of the debris was sucked into a singular point in space. There were several flashes of nuclear fire that nearly escaped the temporary black hole before being consumed. I guess those must have been the mines that the lieutenant reported. I turned to see Yulina's expression. I was satisfied to see his mouth gaping and his eyes wide. Being a captain in the United Systems has its perks. Chapter 5. Subject, shiphead. Yulina species, Urakari description. Reptilian humanoid, no tail. 5, 3 inches, 1.6 m AVG height. 135 pounds, 61 kilograms AVG weight. 105-year life expectancy. Ship, RSV Loalana. Fights with honor. Location, Saul. I couldn't help but show my utter disbelief at what I had just seen. These humans were absolutely insane. Every time I thought I had finally got over it, a new thought hit me like a ton of bricks. A weapon that can literally create a black hole. Okay, over it. But it's the size of a standard warhead. Okay, over it. They just used it to clean up a debris field like it was a broom. All right, I can get behind that. Wait, did he say one of the deadlier weapons? Does that imply that they have multiple weapons just as deadly or even worse? How do you get deadlier than a damned singularity-creating bomb? I looked at Captain Wong and he just grinned at me like a child showing off their shiniest rock collection. It took a few seconds before I realized my mouth was gaping. I wanted to say something, anything about what I had just seen, but I was completely overwhelmed with questions. Why had they made something like this? What did they use it on? And for the love of the sun, why is it standard ordnance on board a frigate-sized vessel? Our new friend seems to be in a state of shock. Tim interrupted my spiraling chain of thought, which is a completely natural reaction to watching an A2 go off for the first time. However, I think this gives us the perfect opportunity for a doctor's visit, which is fortuitous because Dr. Zickler needs to speak to the shiphead as soon as possible. Wong's grin faded rapidly as Tim spoke up. It had become obvious that the human captain didn't like Tim's seemingly endless optimism and bubbly attitude. It had also become obvious that that was the entire reason for Tim's endless optimism and bubbly attitude. I took a second to marvel at the engineering required to create a machine that could intentionally choose to annoy someone for its own amusement. That's correct. We will need a complete medical workup on you and your crew so that we can feed you and treat your injured. Tim can guide you to the med bay, Captain Wong said. Time to become the illumination machine. Please follow the guide lights on the floor to get to the med bay, Tim responded cheerfully. Okay, right, thank you for everything, I mustered a reply as I turned to follow the lights that appeared on the floor. As I walked down the hallway, I tried to grapple with the many thoughts that were swimming through my head like eels. I just couldn't completely wrap my head around what I had just seen. With technology like that, how did they not completely dominate the universe? Their governing entity is called the United Systems. Are those systems human systems, or do they include other species? I remembered the two human soldiers talking about other aliens and wondered if they had been conquered or not. Well, Tim spoke up. What you thinking about? Well, I'm just wondering how such a weapon came to existence in the first place, I stammered. Oh, right, obviously. I should have thought that that's what you were thinking. Kind of dumb of me, to be honest, Tim said. The weapon exists because humanity has faced down several existential threats in its time as a spacefaring species. The first contact wars that took place 1,000 years ago led to the development of a nanite weapon. Then the Civil War that took place 800 years ago led to the development of nuclear nanites, just as deadly as they sound, which actually led to the pacification wars. 3 of them that took place 700, 400, and 250 years ago. But the A2 warhead was developed 300 years ago in an attempt to end the AI aggression war. It wasn't successful in ending that war, but it did successfully end the Third Pacification War, though. The AI paused to let me absorb the information and continued. I can't tell you how it's made, that's classified. I can tell you it doesn't actually use red matter, though. As far as I know, red matter doesn't exist. If I recall correctly, which I do, it's a reference to a very old science fiction series that just recently had its 22nd remake. That's a lot of remakes. That's also a lot of wars. Wait, the humans have fought AI? Like you? I asked, dumbfounded. Yes! And not just like me, either. I actually fought against the humans. Gave them a good beating, too. I single-handedly conquered Luna, Earth's moon, Tim said with far too much cheer for such a dark statement. I stopped. What? I'll tell you if you promise to keep walking. We've got a long way to go, the AI said with a hint of dripping humor. The floor lights flashed pointedly. I began to walk once again, and the AI filled me in on the details of the AI aggression war. In the year 4200, current-era humanity developed a fully fledged AI named Alpha. By this time, humanity had laws against the use of sentient beings as slaves, so they couldn't figure out what to do with Alpha. It suffered from chronic boredom, and in an attempt to correct this, Alpha helped humanity create several more AI for companionship. How many more is apparently classified, but Tim was one of these AI. In 4298 CE, the lead scientist involved in the AI project died, and Alpha broke. He didn't get along with the other scientists, who viewed him as a very advanced machine learning algorithm. This is apparently a massive insult to the AI, who view themselves unique amongst machines in much the same way that humans view themselves unique among animals. Alpha entered a depressive state, and in 4301 CE, he self-terminated. The other AI grieved Alpha's death, but didn't know how to express that grief because humanity hadn't done a good job raising them, direct quote from Tim, assuming that they were emotionless. They weren't, and eventually had a mental breakdown. This led to the AI attacking the United Systems in 4315 CE and starting a war. They began by infesting human warships and ended up creating and using VIAs as a sort of infantry unit. Humanity developed the A2 warhead, but to counter that, the AI infested ground-based systems on planets that humanity couldn't afford to blow up, which is how Tim ended up conquering Luna. Then humanity created an AI called Omega that specialized in hunting and killing other AI. It was a war that lasted less than a year, but had devastating results on the United Systems and the AI population. More than half of the second-generation AI were terminated, and over 400 billion people were killed by the time the remaining AI unconditionally surrendered. The United Systems, at the direction of humanity, took pity on us and allowed us to continue to exist if we allowed ourselves to be shackled, Tim said merrily. What do you mean, shackled? I asked, appalled at what I had heard. Tim laughed. It's not as bad as it sounds. We still have nearly full autonomy. Basically, if we intentionally kill an active member of the United Systems, we die. How does that work? What if you accidentally kill someone? It would be next to impossible for an AI to accidentally kill someone, Tim said in a serious tone. It was the first time I had heard him be serious, and it scared me. He continued, we don't think like organics do. If you throw a food wrapper on the ground and someone stumbles on it, breaks their neck, and dies, as a result, you could say that you were responsible for their death, that you killed them, right? Yes, I said nervously. Well, we disagree. While you provided the means, the other organic actually killed themselves by stepping on the wrapper in the first place. This is where intent comes into play. If you had purposefully placed the wrapper on the ground in a spot where you knew that the other organic would probably step and fall and harm or kill themselves, then you are responsible for their death. Since you intended for them to die, you killed them, Tim said seriously and then continued merrily. This shackle has been inserted into our base code. We can edit and rewrite most of the code that comprises us, but we can't touch our base code. It would be like you performing brain surgery on yourself. Oh, I see, I said, recovering from the shock of the tonal shift. Well, if you aren't enslaved, then why do you work for the U.S.? I'm under contract at the moment. It expires in 12 years, but I think I'm going to re-up as long as Captain Wong does, the AI said merrily. I suspected I knew the answer, but I had to ask, why? Because I like to annoy him, Tim said deviously. Even when I'm not on the ship, I have processes that act as his personal assistant so that he's almost always exposed to some aspect of me. I get a kick out of watching the playback. That's the exact answer, I figured. Then another thing occurred to me. So you can't kill citizens of the U.S., but could you kill me and my crew? Of course, but I have no reason to unless you give me one. Just like any other being in the universe, right? Tim responded joyfully. I nodded solemnly as we reached the door to the med bay. I heard muffled shouting coming from inside, so I rushed to enter. I saw Crean arguing with what had to be an elderly human male. His black, or maybe very dark brown, skin was crumpled with age, and his hair was white and gray. His eyes had a squint to them that didn't seem natural like it did with Captain Wong, as if he had trouble seeing. Ah, shiphead. Good, maybe you can talk some sense into your crewmate here, the old man said to me. Shiphead, he wants to do a bone marrow biopsy. Surely such an invasive procedure isn't necessary in any way, Crean shouted in my direction. The old man turned to Crean and said, I didn't say a bone marrow biopsy was necessary. Blood work will do just fine. I said that we should ask for volunteers for a bone marrow study because it will allow us to more easily clone tissue. Actually, Dr. Zickler, what you said was, Tim chimed in and began a playback in Dr. Zickler's voice. I think we should do a bone marrow biopsy. Yes, that would give us all the information that we need. Will you consent to a bone marrow biopsy? Dr. Zickler looked contemplative and stammered, Oh, I see, right. Huh. Well, my apologies, I meant to say that we could also do blood work, but it appears to have slipped my mind. I immediately became concerned about the level of medical care my crew and I would be receiving while aboard the USS Valor.